that was decided on outside of me.
In your role as press secretary, did you advise on what you believed would help the White House regarding what you could tell the press, or were you just given, or did you see your role as taking marching orders and delivering that message?
I saw my role in making sure that the American people had the information that they needed. That was my role. When it came to policy issues, obviously there are policy experts who knew how to talk about those issues. And I would certainly take their lead on those issues. And most of the things that I talked about was connected to a policy, connected to an issue that my colleagues would certainly play a role in on how we spoke about it.
I asked, I think, in the first hour about your impression of the American people's concern, or whether they had concerns about President Biden's mental or cognitive health. And I understand you certainly can't speak for every person, but maybe I'll leave it to you to characterize. Do you think the American people had those types of concerns, that some of them had those types of concerns, or many?
Look, what I know is that polling was often used from reporters about what the American people believed and thought. Obviously, it's a subset of group and it's a snapshot in time. When you talk about polling, that's as far as I can speak to.
I think one of those polls that got brought up to you at the time was a poll from June of 2024 that found that, quote, 72% of voters do not believe that Biden has the mental or cognitive health to serve as president, as well as nearly half of his own party, end quote. And so when we've brought that up to some of our other witnesses, many have made hay out of separating concerns about President Biden's age from concerns about President Biden's mental or cognitive health. And several have said that they believe that the American people were only concerned about his age. And frankly, I don't believe that. I don't think that this poll reflects that either. What do you make of that?
Look, what I can say is, and I think just repeating what I've said multiple times here, is when it comes to his age, he aged. We all do. We saw it. He talked about it. He owned up to how things had changed for him, certainly physically. He talked about that often. And what I can say, my observation deals with his mental acuity, right, is being able to do the job. And this is someone who was able to do the job day in and day out. And that's what I saw. I'm not arguing the age. I don't think any one of us are.
Sure.
We never did. I didn't do that at the podium. But what I wanted to make very clear is that he was more than capable of doing the job. That's what I observed.
And you've made that clear, and I understand. But I think the question is more so, separately of your opinion, this poll says that 72% of voters do not believe that Biden has the mental or cognitive health to serve as president. Does that sound like they were concerned about his age, or does that sound like they were concerned about cognitive and mental health? Granted, those things are associated with age, but it's a separate question. Is that right?
What I can speak to is what I observed. And we've talked about the age. We've all been very honest about that, I think, and we're not trying to change that up, right? We
Sure.
have said this is someone who's aged. We all age. But what I, just speaking for myself, wanted to be clear as someone who saw him on a daily beat, if you will. He was alert. I would have back and forth conversation with him. And he was always looking for information from me. I was always trying to go back and forth with him on an issue that mattered to him and the American people. I mean, we had a lot of conversations, and this is somebody who was certainly alert and aware and focused every single day.
Right. I don't want to belabor the point, but other witnesses have been hesitant to even admit or say that the American people had concerns about President Biden's mental and cognitive health. But my impression, and I think my impression of your testimony today as well, you were fielding questions about that topic somewhat frequently, independently of his age, questions about his cognitive and mental health. Is that right?
I was the White House press secretary. Anything that the press wanted to talk about came through me.
Right, but including that.
I mean, I think I've been pretty clear that that is something that came up a lot in the briefing room for a good part of my tenure as the White House press secretary. It was talked about a lot. It was brought up a lot, and I answered their questions every time I was asked about it.
You said that you would speak with President Biden about inquiries you were receiving from the press. Did you speak with him about inquiries you were receiving about his mental acuity?
I would let him know what the press was thinking about or wanted to talk about or what was coming up in the briefing room.
What was his response to things like that?
He took it in. I don't remember a specific response, but he would be like, okay.
Really? Like he wouldn't be a little. I would understand if somebody were offended if they were questioning my mental acuity, but you don't remember any kind of response from President Biden?
As I said just moments ago, it was something that came up all the time. So it wasn't unusual for me to say, this is what's coming up in the briefing room, because it was a constant thread, if you will, narrative of the administration. So it wasn't unusual for me to say to him, hey, this is coming up.
What would you actually say, or was there anything you wouldn't say? Maybe you don't want to offend him by phrasing something a certain way. How would you present? It's a delicate issue.
Yeah.
So how would you present that to him?
I mean, look, I was pretty forthcoming and honest with him, and also he would see the briefings himself sometimes, right? Like he would see the reporting himself. So he saw for himself what people were saying and what the reporting was. So, I mean, wasn't telling him any secrets, right? He saw for himself.
Did he ever, have an opinion about his own mental acuity? I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
Can you say more?
Sure. Did he ever opine on the criticism that he was in some sort of cognitive decline, or maybe he lost his fastball or something like that?
I don't remember anything specific to share. I don't remember anything specific. Again, like I said, this was something that came up quite often.
Are there any issues that you remember that, not just this one, but would elicit an emotional response from President Biden when you were, briefing him on something that the press was asking about?
Nothing specific that I can recall.
What about questions about his family?
Can you?
Sure. What about congressional interest in his son, Hunter Biden? Would that elicit an emotional response from the president?
I don't remember an emotional response, but I would mention it to him if it came up in the briefing room and if he asked.
So your testimony today is President Biden was, when you would relay information to him regarding any issue at all, is pretty stoic, didn't...
What you're asking me are about specific things. I'm not taking a broad brush here. And I said this before, there are many times we would have a back and forth about a particular issue, whether it was the economy or legislation, and we would have a healthy back and forth. I think some issues, he just had to take it in. I think it was him taking it in. I wouldn't characterize it as stoic. I would say he was taking it in, taking in the information.
And not to come back to the same point that I was on, but, and I don't, I actually appreciate that you have the way that you've characterized this and explaining that, separating out cognitive health and mental health from the age concerns and saying that, you were aware that the press was asking those questions. And I'm only continuing to ask about it because you may be the first, if not one of the few who've actually had that discussion with us in our interviews. Most of the time, our witnesses have been unwilling to say that the people had concerns about President Biden's.
Just
Medical
I did. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I didn't say the people had concerns. I'm telling you what the press was asking me, and it was pretty consistent. I can't speak for every person in the country. I can only speak to what I was asked in the briefing room and what the press was asking me, and that was what I was speaking to.
I'm not asking you to speak for every American, but do you think that a significant group, you can characterize the grouping if you'd like, but were the American people concerned about President Biden's cognitive or mental health?
Again, I could, obviously you read me one poll, right, that I was asked about. I cannot do a broad brush and talk about the American people, right? I cannot. It's not something that I can do. What I can tell you is my experience, my observation, and things that we have talked about in the briefing room. The president's talked about his age. It's not something that we did not talk about directly or
Sure.
engage on directly.
So the press was very interested in that topic then. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I've said that multiple times, and the briefings would prove that.
And you don't think that that's a reflection in any way that the American people were also concerned about it?
I mean, I can't speak to I can't speak to that. Every outlet has their reasoning to ask questions. I can't speak to that. My job as the White House press secretary is to answer the questions that are before me.
Thank you.